And welcome to PMPLounge.com. In this very important video, we are discussing the top 5 concepts to keep in mind while writing the PMP exam. So these are basically PMP exam tips. We have some other PMP exam tips videos available on this YouTube channel, youtube.com/PMP Lounge as well. So try to find them out. I will link the entire playlist in the description so you can go over it. And these videos are going to be absolutely very, very helpful when it comes to your PMP exam. So these are certain concepts that you need to keep in mind. So what are these concepts? Why should you be keeping them in mind? Well, of course, the reason for why is to clear the PMP exam, right? So these are our top 5 concepts that you must keep in mind and possibly write them down if required in your PMP brain dump so that you do not digress from these when you're answering the PMP questions. So let's take a look at the top 5 concepts that you must keep in mind while answering the PMP exam questions, of course. Tip number 1, being proactive as a project manager. So the project managers takes an active approach to the job. That means the project manager is always proactive. He or she does not wait until a risk materializes and becomes a problem. So that is exactly what proactive means, right? The project manager is basically going to make sure that the risks, if he or she sees a risk, either they do not materialize, or if they materialize, he or she already has a plan to mitigate them, right? Or he or she already has a plan on how to solve these problems, these risks, how to kind of mitigate these risks. So basically, what to do when these risks arise, basically, right? So that means that the project manager will not wait until a risk materializes. The project manager will always have a plan for any risks that he or she foresees. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because this is this is an important concept. Basically, certain questions might arise in the PMP exam. When you're taking up the PMP exam, you might come across certain questions which tests you on this and which will have options that pertain to project manager not being proactive. So always keep in mind that project manager is proactive, and this concept might help you select the correct answer in many questions on the exam. So like I said, when there is a scenario based question, you might have certain options which tend to imply that the project manager was not proactive in solving a certain problem. Those options are definitely incorrect. They are out and out incorrect, because the concept that I want you to remember while writing the PMP exam is that project manager is always 100% of the time proactive. How much of that is true in real life? That is up in the air, right? That depends. But PMP exam, in the PMP exam, a PMP certified project manager in an ideal scenario, an ideal project manager is expected to be proactive and is expected to have seen all the risks before they materialize. So if you see a question and if you find certain options in that question, one option or two option in that question that kind of imply that the project manager was not proactive to face a certain problem, or when a risk materialized, those options are 100% of the time incorrect. So that's the first tip. Project manager is always proactive. Let's move on. Tip number 2, to escalate or not to escalate. Now, if you have read the PMBOK once or twice, and if you have read other project management books, if you have a fair idea of PMP curriculum, and you are presented a question wherein one of the options is that the project manager should escalate the issue to higher management, you might think once or twice, right? Whether to escalate or not to escalate, because we are of the view that project manager has so much power that he or she should be able to solve all problems on his or her own. Is that a real is that in the real world? Of course that might not be the case, but in the ideal scenario, is that correct? Let's see if the project manager should escalate or not escalate. The project manager does not escalate problems to upper management, but that is an a half sentence, that is not like the complete sentence, or to the customer before fully analyzing them and identifying options. So, if it comes down to this, if there is a question in the exam that says, as a project manager, I mean, there is a certain scenario, and then one of the options says, as a project manager, you need to escalate to the customer or you need to escalate to the executive management. Will that option be correct? That depends on whether the scenario that the question is talking about clearly mentions that the project manager has carefully analyzed the entire situation and has identified all the options that he or she can take before escalating to the higher management. Now, when answering a question related to what the project manager should do in a specific situation, you should rephrase the question to, what is the first thing the project manager will do given such a situation and given his or her proactive nature? So, in the previous tip, we learned that project manager is proactive 100% of the time. So, in the scenario that is given in the question, in the PMP question, you must first analyze that the project manager was proactive or not, and then you must analyze that whether he or she has basically gone over all the options available and has acted on them or not. If all of this has been done, then obviously there is no choice left but to escalate, right? But again, the one thing that you should always keep in mind is rephrase the question to, what is the first thing the project manager will do given such a situation, right? So if there is a scenario and the scenario there is a scenario in the question, I mean, right? So if there is a scenario based question and the question says, uh, does not say that the project manager was proactive, the question does not say that the project manager has identified and analyzed all possible solutions, then obviously the answer to that will not be wherein the project manager goes and escalates to upper management. No, because the project manager has to be proactive and the project manager has to kind of analyze all possible options before going the escalation route. Whether you do that in real life or not is a different story altogether. What you do in real life might be good for and might be good and might be recommended for your own specific industry or in your own specific organization. But when you're taking up the PMP exam, it's an exam in an ideal project management scenario. It is not an exam for a specific industry or for a specific company or organization or department. Now, in the PMBOK 6th edition, they have added a section on escalation as well. So, starting Q1 2018, when the PMBOK uh, edition 6 will be used and the PMP exam will have a certain change in terms of the kind of questions you see, you can expect certain questions on escalation. But this tip holds true even that. This tip aligns itself with what's there in PMBOK 6th edition, because the project manager needs to be proactive. The project manager needs to have analyzed all possible solutions, all possible options before going to the higher management and escalating a particular issue. All right, let's move on. Tip number three, lessons learned. So by default, assume that lessons learned in historical databases are available. So in a scenario based question, you need to assume that the lessons learned are available. You cannot assume that the lessons learned are not available, right? So this might not be true in real life situations. So, in certain organizations or in certain departments, there might not be any lessons learned database, right? There might not be a historical database of what has gone wrong or what has gone right and what are the lessons learned from previous projects available to you in real life. But in an ideal PMP scenario, in an ideal project management scenario, that is where the PMP questions address you, right? So in the ideal scenario, you need to assume that lessons learned are available. So, your answer to such scenario based questions, you need to keep this concept in mind that the lessons learned are available and then select the right option. So, like I said earlier, you can always refer to these documents if need be. So, when you're answering the question in the PMP exam, you need to assume that lessons learned are available and a project manager can refer to them, unless it explicitly mentions that lessons learned are not available. In your real life, the lessons learned might not be available, might never be available, but do not imply that in the PMP exam that is the case. That is not the case. Lessons learned are always available. Tip number four is around gold plating. Let me ask you a question now here. How many of you in your real life project management situations and in your organizations have heard the phrase meeting and exceeding customer expectations? Meeting and exceeding customer expectations. Well, meeting customer expectations is great. Exceeding customer expectations might not be as great in many scenario many scenarios. And what are those scenarios? Some of them pertain to gold plating as well. Let's look into this. Let's try to understand what gold plating is. First things first, PMI does not approve adding extra functionality without benefits. So if you have a project, right, and if you go by your real life project management and your real life organizations and your real life departments, wherein you are asked to meet and exceed customer expectations, well, you should not do that. That is what PMI suggests, unless it is adding extra functionality without unless it does add extra functionality. You should not add any extra functionality which has no benefit at all, right? I'll repeat, PMI does not approve adding extra functionality without benefits. Adding extra functionality without benefit is what gold plating concept basically is. If you see a question in the exam that talks about adding certain extra functionality, it does not mention its benefits, that is not an option you need to select, unless of course it is the scenario itself is where you need to select what gold plating is. So like I mentioned, this is the concept of gold plating, and more or less you can definitely expect a question on gold plating in the exam. And always remember, the definition of gold plating is not just a random extra functionality and adding in the scope, right? You need to understand that if you add extra functionality in your end product, which has certain benefits, that is not gold plating. But if you add extra functionality which does not have any benefits, that definitely is gold plating. That is something you should not be doing. That is where the PMI concept of gold plating um, has an issue with the real world organizations, where the real world organizations say that you should meet and exceed customer expectations. Let's move on to the final tip. which is the skills. So project managers have all kinds of soft skills. This is a concept that you should have in mind. If there is an option in a scenario question wherein it says the project manager does not have soft skills, does not possess communication skills, well, that is most likely a wrong answer, because project manager in an ideal world has all kinds of soft skills. Not just that, the project manager also have the required hard skills. Now you may question, what is a hard skill, by the way? So hard skill is something which can be measured, right? Soft skill is something which cannot be measured. A person with really good communication skills cannot be kind of measured, right? He has a communication skill of 7. Well, that's pretty subjective. That's not objective, right? That's your own thinking about someone. But hard skills are skills that can be measured. What is your typing speed? That can be measured. So these are the skills which are basically measurable. And you need to assume, you need to keep this concept in mind while answering PMP questions, that project manager have all the soft skills and all the hard skills required to perform his or her job. The other thing which pertain to the skills is that roles and responsibilities need to be properly defined. If you have a certain scenario question in the exam and it says that it talks about a certain scenario, and then one of the options says that roles and responsibilities are not properly defined, well, that could be wrong, because roles and responsibilities need to be properly defined in an ideal project management scenario. So those were our 5 tips. I hope you like this video. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/PMP Lounge, and check us out on our social media, facebook.com/PMP Lounge and twitter.com/PMP Lounge. As always, do check out the website pmplounge.com, your number one free resource for PMP certification and project management industry information. Thank you.